Let's move on to the electronic drum bus and see what we have there. Okay, so for me to tune this, I'm going to go on a slow and I'm going to leave it on main and I'm going to give it a little bit of a lighter period. And then I'm going to crank the bitter and see what it does to all of the individual transients in the drum mix. Kick, snare, hats, everything. It's going to be painting with a wide brush here. You can hear that click coming out of each sound a little bit stronger. Let's go the opposite direction. Right, and you'll notice that we've lost a little bit of drive and bite out of the kick and the snare and all the different elements in this particular drum mix. It's softened it. Now, this is a really, really good way. Like if you're using, say you have a program kick that's really big, program snare that's really big, but then you have some loops going on and the loops are conflicting with what's happening in your program drums. This is a really good way to kind of pull the transients out of the loop and sit it back behind the transients, the good transients of your program drums, say a kick snare, and all of a sudden the loop, because it's lacking transients now, it kind of sits in nicely to the kick snare program stuff without necessarily having to get into using sidechain to get it out of its way, or maybe some problematic reverb. Maybe you add a reverb to try to soften it to move it back, but ultimately what you're doing is just creating a whole bunch of weird bad air and fogging up the mix. Yeah, it's moved back in terms of the three-dimensionality, but it's kind of creating new mix problems by adding all of this different overlapping air and just bad texture. So this is kind of a good way to work with loops if you're trying to get them to quickly fit and sit under your program drums. Now, I'm going to jump immediately over to the stereo here and just see if I can get the hats out of this loop to bounce a little bit more. Bypass. So you'll notice that just by having it in stereo, those hats all of a sudden get it's not more volume, it's not more level, it's just that the spikes or the attacks of the hi-hat have more presence now. So you can see the benefit of this. It's not necessarily that you're using a compressor to bring it up to the glass, or not necessarily that you're boosting highs to make those hi-hats bigger or louder. Really, all that's happening is you're just telling it only look for what's going on in the sides, and then bring those transients that are perceived in the left and right up, and you're getting a more organic representation of the sample without having to go into additive compression, boosting EQ, using exciters, all those different things. You're getting a much more true representation of the loop just by milking what's already there. Okay, so that's just sort of an example of what you might see in a electronic drum loop. Okay, so now let's go to the weak kick. So for instance, I thought this weak kick was weak. So let's see if we can't figure out a way to get a little more bite out of this kick drum. Now here's the kick on its own. All right, cool. Now I'm gonna do a little fancy pants thing here for you really quick and show you in real time what this would look like. So for waveform visual, believe it or not, there's very few plugins that are waveform generators, meaning they don't show you the waveform as it goes. LFO Tool is a tried and true, beautiful, classic sidechain compression unit. It's obviously much more than that, but it's typically thought of as a sidechain plugin. But if you basically get rid of any effects that are going on, think of that as a dry wet. It's reading nothing. So as I put the kick through the LFO tool, you'll be able to visualize what's happening with the kick. Okay, so now we're going to start processing the kick by bringing up its power. Simple as that. So you can see the difference between what was going into it originally and just cranking the bitter just a little bit. Obviously, the transients are getting spiked out. We're getting a little bit more bite out of that kick drum. We didn't necessarily have to use a compressor. We didn't have to go into resampling. We didn't have to go into anything to get that kick bigger. We didn't change the tune or tone of the kick. All we did was bring out the bite of that kick drum to make it a little bit more functional and have a little bit more dynamic spike and presence in the mix. I'm not going to go through every different permutation of this, but kick, for instance, would be a very good candidate for center. And then you could adjust the period too, because if we adjust the period, all of these little tails right here would be a little bit longer in the middle. Okay, moving on. So that's a weak kick to a little bit of a stronger kick. Same thing here with this weak clap. I will again show you with an LFO tool. So we'll bring up LFO tool and the weak clap. So we'll put the flux in bypass and let's just listen to our weak clap. A little bit of natural variance in there. That's not the end of the world. So now again here, let's just put the bitter on and I'm going to crank the period in this case. And I'm also going to, let's see, turn off the link and give this a little bit more volume here. I'm going to turn it on medium because I don't want it to grab too fast. I want to let a little bit of the initial spike go on before the clap gets affected. So have a look over here for what we just saw. So again, just a very, very simple way to get the attacks to punch out a little bit louder and brighter. You saw what it did to the waveform right off the bat.